Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of What the Tech is Product Management. And this time we have a magician in the house. I'm not talking of a product manager alone. He's an actual magician who turned into a product manager in his career, an alum from UNC. And I'm really excited to have Jared on board. Hey, Jared, do you want to do a quick round of intros?
Absolutely. Hey, Nishant. Hey, Shruti. Thanks so much for having me. As Nishant mentioned, my name's Jared Molton. Right now, I'm the vice president of the consumer business at Udacity, which is part of Accenture. Before that, I spent the past almost 10 years in product management, most recently at Chewy.com, where I led a product team for 3 years. And then before that, I was at Amazon for 6 years, leading product teams there, mostly in the mobile space. As Nishant mentioned, way back I was a professional magician, and so have a lot of experience and can speak to bridging the gap for those with non-traditional backgrounds who are interested in getting into product management.
That's exciting. Shruti. And by the way, are we going to get a magic trick today?
I have a magic trick prepared. I do.
Oh, that's the hook.
Amazing.
Let's skip to the end.
Sounds good.
Yes, yes. Welcome, Jared. We are so looking forward to be talking to you. I'm Shruti, and I'm the product manager at Snowflake. I lead Snowflake native applications.
Hey
Nishant.
guys, I'm Nishant. I'm your co-host. I am a product manager at Walmart. And without any further ado, let's get started. Jared, first of all, help us understand your initial days as a magician, how it fared, and like what motivated for a career switch. And if you knew you were getting into product management from day one, yeah, tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So I'll try to start with just my journey as a magician, and then we can bridge it into the story of how I got into MBA school and product management from that background. So it actually all started when I was in high school. And as a teenager, I was always very interested in magic. And as a younger kid, I was always very interested in it. I was in Las Vegas and I saw a magic show, a guy named Lance Burton, one of the most amazing magic shows I've ever seen. And I remember sitting in the audience and thinking, oh my God, this guy is making millions of dollars a year in Las Vegas doing the coolest thing in the world. Like, this could actually be a job and a profession and a career. How do I do this? And that's really what got me started. And so, whereas prior to that, whenever I kind of caught the magic bug, I would buy a trick or two, learn how it was done, and that was
Mm-hmm.
it. Right after that show, I made a commitment to myself to pursue this with kind of everything that I had as a 15-year-old, whatever that means. And so I started, doing magic shows around my town. I grew up in Montclair, New Jersey. Eventually grew a small business. Kind of started learning the ropes of marketing and operations and all of these other parts of a business that you need to do when you're an entrepreneur and doing it for yourself. And so did magic through college. After college, I moved back to New York City. So Montclair, New Jersey is right outside New York City. And eventually took over as the general manager of New York City's oldest magic shop. Was in that role for about 3 years and helped turn that business around. So when I joined, there was a lot of opportunity in the business. We made a couple of investments, which we can talk about if there's interest there, and really started learning the ropes of driving a business forward, both from a retail perspective, but then also from an e-commerce perspective. Didn't know it at the time, but as we were testing and trying things, there's again a lot of overlap between doing that from a business perspective and e-commerce perspective and some of the stuff that we do as product managers. Had a great experience. And after about 3 years, thought, you know what? I really enjoyed this business side of things. Um,
Gotcha.
I don't know how to scale that for a magic shop. My audience is pretty niche. It may not be something that is going to drive kind of a long term career. How do I now take that to the next level? And that kind of drove the decision to go back to school and get my MBA.
Got it. Got it.
My God, that's like one hell of a story I've heard. 15-year-old interested in magic, then, scales up the business and then does MBA and enters tech.
That's insane, right?
Yeah, I mean, amazing.
Hey, quick
It's
question.
been a lot
How
of fun, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
How does one learn magic? Like, do you have schools over there? Like,
Yeah.
do you have coaches, people? Like, yeah,
Yeah,
what do you
great
do?
question. So when I started, it was before YouTube existed. I think YouTube makes it a lot easier for young magicians today who can kind of get started and watch a lot of magic. YouTube didn't exist, right? This is like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And so I had to find books. And most of the magic books that exist are not available at the library. Sure, there are some that are at the library, but the really good ones you can really only get from a magic shop. And so I started with the basic ones you could get from the library, started learning my the chops through that way. And then I found this magic shop in New York City called Tannins. So it's the oldest magic shop in the country. New York City was only 12 miles from Montclair, New Jersey. I took the bus into New York City, found the magic shop, and I remember it was on the second floor of the building, and you would take the elevator up. And so I walked. I didn't know, it was Midtown Manhattan. I'm like 15 years old by myself. I'm like, where am I? What am I doing? I go into this elevator. I'm like, this is really weird. What's going to happen here? And then the doors open, and there's these beautiful display cases and props and shelves of books. And as a wide-eyed young magician, I was like, this is it. This is the moment. This is the place for me to really learn. And I bought books and I kept learning. Tannins actually also manages a magic camp for young magicians, which is it's a week long camp over the summer. And so I started going to the camp when I was a teenager. I eventually became, a counselor at the camp, and then eventually helped manage the camp when I operated Tannins. And so, through all of those different means, I was able to learn and develop my skills as a young magician.
That is insane. Like, I actually got goosebumps somewhere. Like, when you were saying I was walking into this unknown place, it takes a lot of guts. I'm glad you chose magic. And yeah, Shruti, did you have any questions?
No, I think that's great to hear about your initial journey from kind of like, magician to scaling the business, understanding the concepts of business, and then finally landing into the product world. Would love to understand your take between, like what were the similarities, but what were the things that you also had to learn? So both similarities and
Yeah, I think
dissimilarities
there's a
of the
lot of
journey for
overlap,
you.
and I talk about this a bit in the book that I just published, which is called "For My Next Trick: A Magician Transforms into a Tech Exec." And so there's some really good overlap between the
Amazing.
world of magic and the world of product. And I think that one of the first ones that comes to mind for me is the feedback loop and idea of iteration. And so as a magician, I have a live feedback loop. When I'm performing magic for you, I watch your reactions. I watch
Yes.
where your eyes are going. I'm able to,
Yes.
ascertain how the magic trick that I have formed is coming across, what's working, what's not working.
Yep.
I take that feedback, I go back, I improve it based on what I saw, and I continue to iterate. At the magic shop, what was really fun about working there is you're in a space where people want to see magic all the time. So it's a great place to just work and refine your own material. So I was able to do that a lot, at the magic shop, and it's still something that I do today. I have a ton of tricks in my personal backlog that are works in progress that I'm, showing and showcasing to my friends and family, getting that feedback so that when I perform it professionally, I know it works and it hits. Product management is the same way. It's just that your, mechanism to get that feedback is a little bit different. So with product management, you're getting feedback from customer reviews. Maybe you have surveys embedded in, your software. Maybe you're using customer satisfaction scores or NPS scores. Oftentimes, as product managers, we're working really closely with a support team or customer service to get the feedback from them of what's working, what's not working. All of that gets triangulated into customer pain points, more or less, that we then take and we start making meaningful improvements on a product based on the insights that we're unpacking there. The difference between the two is that with product management, I can then learn again at scale. And so I take what those learnings are, I find a solution that I believe works, I roll it out in a test, and I see if it really works or not. And so I think that's one of the big overlaps. Another big overlap that I've talked about as well is preparation. And so what that means is that for me to actually perform a magic trick, it takes a lot of practice. It takes practice for the sleight of hand. It takes practice for the presentation. It takes practice for just making sure that I have the right pauses in my communication. all of that is preparation that then ensures, a better effect when I present it. I think the same is very true in the world of product management. Oftentimes we have to have really difficult conversations with other team members or senior leaders. If you go into those conversations without doing your preparation, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. The conversation isn't going to go well. You're not going to have the right discussion. You may not end up with a decision, and then you have to regroup. And not only is that not good for the business because it slows down your pace of delivery, but it's not good for your personal development because you're looked at as a leader. And if you're not coming into a meeting prepared, not able to drive the decision that you want, you may not leave that meeting with the same kind of perception of your leadership skills that you're looking for. Those are two big ones that come to mind. I think that the third is probably executive communication. And so this is something along the lines of, as a magician, you're a performer, you're on stage. Certainly things may come up that you have to deal with in terms of improv, but you have to be able to communicate crisply and succinctly. You also have to be able to communicate with folks of all different types of backgrounds. I think those are skills that you can take with you, whether you're doing a performance from a presentation perspective, or you're doing a PowerPoint deck, or at companies like Amazon. Even we would use document writing more than presentations. And when you're finished reading the document and you're having that discussion, you still have to come across, really concisely and crisply in your verbal communication skills to the senior leadership team. And so those things all kind of come together to ensure that you're really delivering, a great presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of followed along, like there is a design partner thing where you're talking to customers, getting feedback, observing how they're
Yeah.
reacting to things, when their eyes light up. And then obviously this whole communication skill, which is so core. Like, I mean, like I had a situation as of last week where, like we went into a presentation, there was a lot of questions around why is this important? And if you don't have the ability to communicate, then, the results often don't end up in your line. So I mean, that's wonderful takeaway, and I'm looking forward to reading the book as well, Chad. Nishant, anything
No,
that you
this
want to
is
follow up
really
on?
fascinating. Like the fact that we're talking about, okay, taking feedback, practicing, and then like communicating succinctly. I'm curious
Yes.
if you can dive deep into the preparation part of it. Like, I mean, right before a big presentation, right before a big show, right? There must be some sort of a ritual that you go through, and I'm curious, like, what did you do before these big presentations or big shows? Anything that you were able to drive between the two words?
Whew. Oh, there's definitely some overlap. I think that the actual tactics that you take are going to be different. So before a big
Mhm.
show, I can think back. I did this show in Seattle for a number of years called Conjuring Nightmares, and it was a 1 man, 1 hour show. And it was just this brainchild of fun that I had like put together, and I was like, this will be a really fun show to develop. But it was a true theater show, which means that I'm in the middle of the stage. There's a spotlight. Most of the time, I can't see the audience, and so the preparation for that, from a nerves perspective, is just making sure that you go out ready to go. You are, you're always going to be nervous. There's no way to not be nervous, but how to manage those nerves in a way that makes sense. And so, for me, what that meant was running and practicing that show multiple times over the week going into it. And it was rehearsing in my bedroom, in front of a mirror, and then also rehearsing in the actual theater space. And for anything that I was really worried about, maybe I would bring it to an open mic that week before and test it out and just see like, hey, is this one, difference working for me or not working for me? And just kind of continuing to make sure that I felt confident in not only the tricks, but also the presentation of the show as well. When it comes to an executive meeting, I think that I take a slightly different approach. I'm not really sitting in my room practicing in front of a mirror, but I am sitting in front of my computer and usually writing down, the rude, frequently asked questions that I may get. And so if I go through my presentation or document, my goal is to poke holes in my own argument and make sure that I can understand where those holes may be, so that if I'm having that conversation with a senior leader and they are like, hey, what about XYZ? Don't you think that's an issue? I can say, you know what? That's a great point. I've thought about it. This is how I think about that question. This is how I think about that space. And so now all of a sudden, instead of, being a deer in headlights in a meeting, you are ready with a really articulated response. And that just takes running through your show. In this case, your show is your meeting, your show is your
Right.
presentation or your document, and figuring out kind of where those gaps or issues may be so that you're ready to speak to them.
Right.
That's great. I did have a question. So you kind of talked about, you're looking at customer, trying to get their feedback when, presenting the act during your magician journey. But like, let's say you had a new idea for your act, right? Like, for example, the one that you did in Seattle. Um, how did you know that it was going to work? Like, would you do any kind of concept validation with like
Yeah,
some kind
so
of
great
audience that you
question.
know?
And actually, before you guys asked, what are the differences between magic and product management? And I think that this is a really stark difference where when I'm performing magic, as much as I'm performing it for the audience, I'm also performing it for myself as an artist. And unlike
Right.
product management, where at the end of the day, like with magic, I can work on, there's one trick. I speak to about this as well in the book. It's called the Jack Merlin's Aces, and it's a really hard card trick from a technical perspective, incredibly
Okay.
challenging. I started working on it in, I don't, 2012, maybe 2011, and I'm still working on it right now. It's something that I'm
Oh, yeah.
still working on and refine. I will do it for people. I've actually done it in my professional show before. Like it's ready, but it's still a work in progress, and it's still something that I'm actually very interested
Hmm.
in working on and refining and tuning. And I would say that's the difference between magic and product management. Whereas if that were a product, ship it. It would be good enough. We're done. We call it a day. It's hit diminishing returns. We have to move on to the next thing, the next value add.
Yeah.
So I think where art differs a bit from product management in this case is that when it comes to a show, I don't actually know if everything's going to work for the audience or not. And sometimes I don't care because I'm not actually doing it just for you. I'm also doing it for me and for my expression as an artist. With that said, the goal is obviously to astonish the audience. So that means that no matter what it is, it has to be technically sound. It has to be magical. It has to be incredible. But it may not be something that you're interested in, Trudy. So I have a trick that I did in the Conjuring Nightmares show where I swallow 50 sewing needles and then I swallow a piece of thread and I pull the thread out with all of the needles attached, right? And
Oh, yeah.
so I'm able to rethread the needles in my stomach and pull it out. And something like that can make the audience queasy. They don't necessarily like it. It's amazing, but they're not like, oh my God, this is like, yeah, I want to sit here and watch it. It's more like, it's like there's this tension there. And I'm okay with that because that's actually the feeling that I'm looking to elicit with that show, rather than it just be kind of, sunshine daydreams.
Yeah, yeah, no, makes sense. I mean, the only other difference that I can think about, and I'll let you, speak more, is the audience as well. Like, at least in my business, it's very enterprise. So a lot of time our customers know what they want, right? Like, they're very technical in nature. They use the product. They're probably using thousand other products which are similar in nature. And, they're like, they are very heavy users of the product, while in your case you know the tricks, no one knows how it is happening, and the whole idea is to astonish them or like surprise them with the
I think
act.
that's
That is so
right.
true, actually.
So
Go
yeah.
ahead, Nishant.
Oh, no, I was gonna say that is so true in the sense like in the magician world, you probably cannot be completely transparent with them. It's almost like you have to hide enough to make it acceptable to them. And the only people,
It's
like,
your
you can
niche.
probably take soft
Yeah.
cues from their reactions, but maybe other magicians are able to tell you, okay, this is fascinating. Okay, only I would know the difficulty behind what you did. And that's something that the audience wouldn't even know. Like, you may have done something fascinating, but visually speaking, it may not evoke the same kind of emotion that reflects your effort altogether, right?
It's a completely different show for a magician than it is for a lay person who's watching the show.
Yeah.
Because I think to your point, when a magician is watching the
Yeah.
show, they're analyzing it through the lens of, wow, technically that's actually very difficult what that magician is doing, or wow, the presentation that this magician put on this set is really interesting and different and something I've never seen before. And so you're really thinking about it differently when you're performing for magicians than for a regular audience in that case. And maybe that's a good way to kind of draw the distinction where if we're thinking about product management and the overlap, maybe the enterprise customer in this case is like a magician watching the show. Whereas, if you're doing product management for
Yeah.
Yeah.
consumer customers, oftentimes they don't really know what they want. They know what their problems are, but they don't know what the solution is. And so that's where you do have to kind of take that and find a way to deliver a great solution that works for them. And maybe that's a good reason why I've been on the consumer side for most of my career.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like there are a lot of times when I was working for Splunk when our customer would say, "Hey, are you like, like this is what we need and we have solved it using this 100 products, but we want you to solve. You can solve it in a different way." But like, they were so technically hands-on with the product where sometimes you'll be surprised that you don't know about every nitty-gritty of your product so well as much as they would know. Just because there are like so many layers in the infrastructure.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, this
that's
is very
interesting.
cool to hear.
I think when it comes to enterprise customers, at the end of the day, they're absolutely going to be the experts because they're using it day in and day out. So in a
Yeah.
way, they know where all the bodies are buried in the product and kind of what needs to be fixed and with
Yes.
what urgency.
It's a fun exercise
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
because
no, true.
they know a lot of stuff that they know, and they also don't know what they don't know because they're also like group thinking in their context. So that's where we can sometimes add value, but for the most part,
Yeah,
just listen to them and you know the critical pain point. Because when we're talking about enterprise software, there's so many different players in the ecosystem. There'll at least be three or four of them thinking holistically, and then if you're able to get to the right person
yeah,
who's thinking in terms of the business, usually that solves like a major pain point in terms of finding their pain points.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Is always starting with the
yeah.
pain points because there's a lot of ways of solving it for them. And so, you just even if you have
Yes.
5 solutions, the first solution that you have may not actually be the right solution. And so if you continue to focus on those pain points and the insights that you're deriving from those pain points, that's where it comes into, your testing framework to say, hey, does solution A work? Does solution B work? And I think that a really good way to think about shipping solutions is how do you prove your hypothesis that this is the right solution? And what metrics are
Mm-hmm.
you going to use to make sure that you're having that conversation so that you don't end up in a world where you're just shipping a lot of stuff that may not actually be as valuable to your customer.
Makes total sense. Hey, we're at the half hour
No,
mark. I want
no,
to
makes
stick to the analogies and move on to the next question and say, okay, do you have any tricks around navigating a PM career in general? Like, I know you have been at Amazon, but just curious, what are your thoughts on navigating the product management career?
Yeah, absolutely. So, proud to say that I started at Amazon as a senior product manager right out of MBA school. I didn't know a thing about product management in that form, when I joined, and I was able to get promoted to a principal product manager tech at Amazon. So I also was able to add the tech title to my role, even though my undergrad was in journalism. My background was at Hogwarts, I guess, right? It was not in computer science or any type of technical field. So I had to learn a lot on the job. I think that two of the most important characteristics for especially new product managers and growing your career as a product manager. And again, I can only speak to my experience at Amazon and then at Chewy, which actually uses very similar product mechanisms that Amazon does. Is two. So the first is that you have to be actively curious and interested in learning, and what that means is not just interested in learning about your customers and what they want, but also in the technology that your team is building and how it works and what the risks are and why it doesn't work. And when a engineering leader wants to have a conversation about refactoring your backend, you need to have an opinion and point of view on whether that's the right or wrong thing and why they're doing it. And what that means is sitting down with them at a whiteboard, having them, draw out what the plan is, talking about the pros and cons, and making sure that you're making the right decision, not just obviously for the technical team, but also for the business, because there's a lot of overlap between technical, business, and customer. when it comes to product management. And so I think that just being actively curious, actively listening to folks when they're talking, making sure that when you're joining a new team or a new technology platform, you're setting up that time and dedicating time to sit down with the subject matter experts to really understand how it works, and what the trade-offs are versus other systems that they may be using. And so I think that that's pretty important. The second one that comes to mind for me, I guess I can pause there and then we can talk about the second one. You guys want to questions on that one? You want to talk about?
No, I love that. I mean, for me, like curiosity is such a big thing, and it's almost to the point of annoying, right? Like when you're asking so many questions to a tech person who's been in that space for 10 years, let's say, and you're new to that role, you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable or making them uncomfortable and just asking all the questions from day one and set that tone that okay, you bring in technology, I'll bring in data, I'll bring in business
That's
expertise,
right.
I'll bring in like customer expertise, right? Just keep up a forum and a culture within your pod to always ask the questions versus trying to hide away from them because it's kind of not easy because you have been 6 months in the role and you don't know something basic, right? That shouldn't be like a feeling in the group at all. Like that's why I
I
always am with the first one asking all the dumb questions. I'm like, okay, it might feel like the wrong thing to do, but when you set that tone for your group, they're always going to be upfront about it versus trying to figure it out
Yeah.
themselves and ending in the K rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even if you come from like a tech background, right, Jared? Like, I recently moved team, and I was talking to Nishan. There's like, I it feels like I've gone to ground
Yeah.
zero where I don't have a clue about this persona that I'm supposed to be building the product for. So I have to ask them question, and I have an engineering team who's been there for so long, and I have to understand everything that they are doing. And you have to be curious. You have to have the humility to say that I don't know things, and it's okay. Even I have been a product manager for 11 years. I'm going to ask questions which I feel
Yeah,
uncomfortable,
absolutely.
but
And
I
I
have to
find
do it
that
for the product.
usually, and not usually always, your business partners are actually really happy to have those conversations. And especially if you
Yeah.
preface it, you join a new team, you're like, hey, I'm a caveman or cavewoman. Like, I don't know anything about this space. I'm going to have a ton of questions for you over the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks as I'm ramping up. It may come across as, overwhelming. If it does, just let me know and we can set up separate time. But I really just want to learn your space better. I want to learn about our customers better, and all of this will help me make the right decisions. And I find that most of the time, folks are really accommodating to that.
And the word new
Yeah.
is also relative, right? I
True.
keep saying I'm new to the team. I mean, like I could be 2 years in, and there might be 10 years people in there. So I'd be like, I'll still be new, relatively speaking.
Well, I think that if you're 2 years in, calling yourself new to the team, maybe it'll be a stretch.
I know.
um,
But that also brings up a really good point, actually. So, Shruti, just like you're working on something where you're trying to learn for yourself, I was in a weird setting where there are like multiple VPs and directors who are supposed to be knowing everything about everything. But at the end of the day, there was this core confusion around the definition of a product, right? Oh, what is managed serve versus self-serve? And there was this third product that was hybrid, and we were just going in circles for the first couple of weeks, thinking, okay, what is what, and what are we trying to optimize for? And I had the luxury of just diving deep and then like abstracting everything out and making it simple for people. So even though you might be in the business for so long enough, sometimes things is changing swiftly in another part of the world and may not be on top of things. You may think you know everything, right? But at the end of the day, it helps to have that lens of someone help you out saying, okay, let's not get into the details, but at your level, this is what you should be caring about, right? That curiosity will be able to help you simplify things as well for everyone in the group.
well, I don't think
And Jared,
I don't think you'll
yeah, oh,
ever know everything about your space. And I think that the benefit that senior leaders usually have is they have more information from more sources than you do. And so when it
yeah,
comes to making a decision,
Yeah.
they may have input, for example, from the legal team on a certain thing that's impacting a whole nother part of the business that doesn't affect you. But because they have that, understanding, it's changing their perception of the feature that you're talking about and launching. And so I think that that kind of portfolio of experiences helps drive a lot of information, especially at that level.
And just because you have to deal with so many pillars, I think it's
No.
important for mid tier and low tier folks to also be very succinct and get it to the point, because they cannot keep a tab of 100 into 100. They can definitely keep a tab of 100 into 1, right? So, that what is that one thing you want to know about this problem so that I can contextually tie everything together, right?
Couldn't agree more. I think that that's where, going back to the it's always showtime. When you're talking to senior leadership, really deliver that message clearly, make sure they understand it, and then give them the space to ask questions, which is, I think, the same actually for interviewing. If you're kind of getting into this field and you're looking to interview as a product manager, make sure you have your star stories down and then stick to those star stories. And then if anybody has questions along the way, they can ask them. But oftentimes I've interviewed over 250 people for product management roles over my career. Folks will end up going in these really interesting directions for them that aren't actually hitting on the result, or the task or the action that the star story is trying to represent. And so by the end of it, you've gone for a ride.
Yep.
It doesn't, land as this crisp story that they're trying to tell. And so it's really important to just make sure you're getting to the point. So yeah, couldn't agree more. Going to the second piece in terms of
Yep.
preparing for product management and kind of those characteristics that are really important. Um, Thinking deeply and critically, I found to be one of the most important characteristics, and it was the linchpin for me of going from a senior role to a principal product manager role, is being able to scale my ability to think deeply. And what I found, and it took me a long time to figure this out. Oftentimes I thought that I, knew what I was doing and I knew the space, and like, here's a PRFAQ, which is it's a document style that we use at Amazon that I think will work. And of course I know what the customer pain points are and this is the right solution for them. And the piece that really was holding me back for a long time was my ability to look at whatever my solution was and say, well, why is this the wrong solution? What other solutions did you consider? What are the pros and cons
Yep.
here? So that we're having a conversation about the framework that I use to get to that decision rather than just kind of the solution or decision itself. And figuring out that piece of it unlocked an entire level of product management scope for me, and product management thinking for me that I was then able to
Yep.
scale. And so for all the folks listening out there, if you take away one thing from this, you're like, how do I become a great product manager? For any single decision, I don't care how small or how big it is, think about what are the different options we have, what are the pros and cons of those options, what's the right recommendation based on unpacking those pros and cons. And if you bring that to the table every single time,
Yep.
you'll always be the most prepared product manager in the room.
Yeah, I mean, like we have, personally, I have used this tactic so often where there is disalignment between two leaders that this should not, this is not something we should invest in versus this is something we should invest in. And like, just having that unbiased opinion listed down. And even though you're biased intrinsically towards something because you've heard it from customers, still having the other option and what it would mean, like it solves so many escalations, so many discussions, right? Like I think it gives a lot of structure. The other factor you kind of talked about, going deep, I also feel like it's
Yes.
also about going horizontal and taking a back step and thinking about where does your story fit into everything that's happening org wide, also is kind of very essential for
I
something
couldn't agree
going
more.
up the
I think
ladder
that
too.
that ends up being one of the pros and cons. So your pros and cons are not actually always going to be data related.
Yeah.
Obviously, you'll have your pros and cons that are customer and
Yeah.
data related, but you may also have one that says, by the way, we're also
Yeah.
launching XYZ on this part of the business. And if we include this at that launch time, we'll be able to ride the tailwinds of that and be able to present a more unified portfolio approach, for example. And we think that, and especially if you've done
Yeah.
your homework, you'll be working with the public relations team and you'll say, I spoke to the public relations team. They believe that
Yeah.
doing this all together is the right thing to do. And so if you have that horizontal view, those are just
Yes.
additional data points to add to your arsenal. I also think it helps you earn trust
Yeah.
of senior leadership. So when you bring all of the options to the table, and sometimes an
Yeah.
option is like do nothing or go with what we have today and don't end up making any of these investments. they see the thinking that you've done and they trust you a lot more as a leader and as a decision maker.
I feel like when that
Yep,
zooming
true,
and zooming
true.
out is extremely important as a product manager. Like when you zoom in, I feel like you get the execution part very well. You're able to clearly identify the main pain points and tie them all together. But when you zoom out, that's when you come up with opportunities. They're like new spaces that you can potentially expand into, and understanding the full context of the consumer. I think it needs to happen over time because you, to your point, Jared, we have to first earn the trust of the customer,
Right.
add value in the space that they really care about, and then start asking broader concentric or peripheral questions where we think we can expand into. I think that's where it's been pretty helpful for me to work with one of the leaders who comes from Amazon and Uber, and he does a very good job of tying so many different pillars. I'm like, okay, my head is hurting. I'm impressed. I want to learn more from you
Yeah.
because it's one of those things when you're so zoomed in, you have so much to uncover. It's a rabbit hole, right? And you
Yeah,
almost as a product manager get some sort of excitement around it because you're able to solve the problem perfectly. But then is that the main problem to solve? Or have you solved enough and are there bigger problems to solve at this
yeah,
point, right? Zoom out and then you start seeing the other bigger
yeah.
opportunities around you.
And I think that's where product actually adds value, because if you see an engineering driven organization, that's where things start to go wrong, right? Because they have a lot of great ideas, creative ideas, but they need a person who can zoom out and say, are all these creative ideas the need of the day? Should we all invest in this? Because each one of those need an engineer to work on. And that's where I think our job, even though a lot of people might not like it from our stakeholder perspective, is to say no often, which is like again a characteristic every PM should have. Not probably everyone is not comfortable, but everyone is continuously building on it. I am still building on it even after 11 years. I feel so bad saying no to a project, but I have to do it very often because I that is not the need of
I
the
think
day.
adding to that,
But yeah,
Shruti, oftentimes it's not a just kind of a hard no, but it's a maybe, but let's add it to the backlog and evaluate it, because I think that what you don't want to
yes,
do is,
yes,
be the
exactly.
person that's always naysaying ideas and blocking innovation. And that's like the balancing act of a
Yeah,
product manager, is kind of
yeah,
saying no in a
yes,
soft way where that yes is still kind of maybe available in the future. And it's always worth revisiting, right?
yes,
And so that's why
yes.
we have backlogs. That's why we have prioritization frameworks. That's why we figure out kind of, what is going to be the actual
Yes.
outcome that we're trying to drive. And maybe that idea that comes in from left field does have
Yep.
a better outcome than maybe something that you're working on. And if that's the case, you reprioritize.
True. True, true. I mean, I can give you an example. Last year we had a project where not everyone was well aligned. And we kind of like within the organization at a leadership, there was a little bit of misalignment where we said, okay, we agree to disagree. We still, my team will still move ahead with the project. And it was so well timed because there was something that happened at Snowflake very recently. We launched a project and, it kind of
Hmm.
helped with like eliminating a lot of bad press for us. So
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't say, like it could have been better timed, and it's okay to sometimes take that risk on innovation, even if it's not hurting you right now. It might like help you with something
It's a
that you
great
do not
example. Yeah.
anticipate
I
the
think that like probably
outcome.
all of
Yeah.
us have examples of,
Yeah.
times where we've had to, change up the roadmap and make sure
Yeah.
that we're prioritizing the right thing based on some current event.
Yes. Yeah. Cool. Should we move on to the next
Yeah, I
question,
know,
Nishan?
Jared, you were talking a little bit about interviewing 250 plus candidates, right? So tell us a little bit more about it. Like, what do you focus on interviews, in these interviews, and what should candidates be looking for? Like, how can they pick feedback from the audience and get better at their story narration?
Yeah, I think that I'll start by saying when it comes to interviewing, you do not try to read the interviewer and adjust as you go, because I think that unlike magic, where you may be doing that in real time, it'll really take you off track. As far as interviewing, I've interviewed over 250 people for Amazon and for Chewy. And in both cases, both companies have leadership principles. The Amazon ones are fairly famous, and the interviewer is usually responsible for understanding whether the candidate meets, exceeds, or doesn't meet on usually two or three of the leadership principles. And so,
Okay.
before the interview, it's usually a panel of about four or five different interviewers. Each of them get two or three leadership principles. And then the questions that I'm asking are very specific to those leadership principles. What candidates can do to prepare is certainly one, understand the values of the company before they interview. So if there are leadership principles, you should have read them, you should know that they exist. But then I would say find the five or four, a handful that you think you're really strong with, and focus on developing star stories that speak to those four or five. You're not going to
Okay.
be able to game the system by, Amazon, I think now has 14 leadership principles. Like you're not
Oh
going
yeah.
to have to get that, you will have like what, two or three star stories per leadership principle if you want to game the system. And then you'll be like listening to the interviewer to be like, oh, what LP are they trying to read it? Okay, it's this one. Let me go to my Rolodex. Okay, here's my story. Like it's just not going to come across as natural. And
Yeah.
so my advice is, figure out the four or five that you're really strong in and focus on those stories, and tell that story and really stick to the star format. Even recently I switched jobs. I joined Udacity. During that job search and job transition for myself, I wrote down all of my star stories, and I found that before I wrote them all down, and I was, kind of taking a little bit more of a shoot by the hip approach, where I was relying on my, communication skills, and, it wasn't working as well. And I would go into these interviews and
Gotcha.
end up, going off on tangents. Even me, somebody who's like interviewed 250 people, makes the same mistakes when it comes to myself. And so write down the star stories on paper, say them out loud so that okay, these are the points that I need to hit on, and then tell those stories when you get into the interview. The piece of it that I do think is really important is to not be robotic. For better or for worse, if you come across as robotic or too practiced, the interviewers see through that and don't actually draw a human connection to you.
Hmm.
And when you're hiring, it's all about human connection. You're looking to hire people you like. Very, very rarely are you going to hire somebody that you don't like, or you don't get along with, or you don't have a connection with. And for better or for worse, it's why hiring is so hard, frankly, and why oftentimes we hire people that aren't great. And so, in order to have a human connection, even though you've practiced, and even though you've rehearsed, and even though you know your star stories inside and out, you want to plan a little bit like a performance on where you make it seem natural. And there's some like little things you can do there. It could be you ask me a question, Shruti, and for the interview, and I know exactly how I'm going to answer it, but I say, "Oh, hold on, it's a really good question. Let me think about an answer." Okay, I think I have one. And even that pause there is now like, it's not, oh, great question. Well, when I started with ABC and then XYZ and then this was the result. You're like, okay, thank you. Let's move on. And so, you want to build those in. The other piece of it, that it's going to sound probably a little crazy, but I find that it's a really nice way to just make you sound human in the context of an interview, is adding in ums. So oftentimes in language, we're trying to take those ums out, right? Especially during presentations. And
Mhm.
I just did it, but I did that. That was authentic. In this case, you want to add in so that it comes across as you're thinking about the words that you're going to say next, so that it doesn't come across as scripted. So you want to just find those different ways of baking in a little bit of humanity into the conversation.
Almost like you have to
Yeah. I
go ahead.
think
Go ahead, Shruti.
perfectly said. No, I was saying perfectly said, right? Like, I think when I interview for people, I definitely look for structure, but I also look for that human connection. Like, it should feel like a conversation than me asking you a question and you just responding and, like, not pausing to actually understand whether the person in front of you is also understanding what you're speaking, right? Like, and having those pauses. And I've seen so many people being uncomfortable to take those pauses, that hold on, let me take a second to reflect back and then I'll come back with the answer. Like, because it's silent, like everyone is silent, so not a lot of people feel comfortable. When Nishant and I were prepping for our meta interviews, you remember, Nishant, we're like
I
training
know.
to
I
take
remember.
pauses. So
It makes you human, and that
yeah,
matters.
So
yeah, yes,
I was gonna
yes,
say, like, I mean,
yeah,
when
yeah,
we talk
true,
about
true,
interviewing candidates, something I look for is also imperfections in the overall story. In the sense, like, you might be perfect in one instance or twice, but how did you pivot and what did not work is the bigger learning for you. And that also makes me think, like, okay, I'm a product manager. I've, I'm dealing with so many products, and none of them is perfect. Every single day is a
Sure.
fire drill. And so I expect you to have fire drills. I expect you not
yeah,
to have answers, but found answers, right? That sort of have a structure, but also leave some for the magic, unlike with the real magic shows, have make sure that there's space for art in there,
hmm,
right? That way, it feels like you're connecting with the person. Let them drive the
yeah,
conversation sometime, not be speaking all the time, right? Take cues,
yeah,
pause, ask them if everything is making sense, or if that's the one that they're looking for. If not, pivot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great
yeah,
point, Nishant, which is,
yeah,
after you deliver your story, saying like, did that story answer your question? Do you want me to go deeper? Is there anything else that you did that I didn't answer there that you want to talk about, and kind of giving them the opportunity to probe a bit more? I'd say that it's partially the interviewer's job to bring up some of those challenges, because everybody, when they're putting their stories together, they're going to come across as a superhero. So how
Right.
do you, probe during the interview to find some of the complexity and nuance in the delivery? Okay, it sounds like that worked out really well. Like, what were the other options you considered? What didn't work that led you there? And asking those questions, you'll find some really good insights about how they handle, ambiguity, or how they handle difficult situations as they're building.
Awesome. Awesome.
no, perfect. Let's move on to the next one.
Is it
We would
magic
love to
trick
see a
Yeah.
time?
magic trick.
Yes.
Okay, you got it.
Yes.
So,
I'm going to
first,
figure this out in 2 minutes.
what's that?
I'm going to figure out the trick in 2 minutes.
We'll
That's my
see.
challenge. I'm just kidding.
Hopefully not. So, this ring that I wear on my finger is really special to me. And the reason for that is it's made out of silver, but it's made out of this really interesting version of silver that gets really soft when you heat it up. And sometimes it gets so soft that you can actually throw it right back on your finger.
I want to see that again.
Here, try to do it a little bit differently this time. I'm going to try to keep it in
Okay.
front of the camera. I only have kind of this box view here.
Sure.
But this time, what we're going to do is we're going to make it so soft that it travels finger by finger. There we go, until it goes across my hand.
Man.
Oh
What is
my
this trick called?
God.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay.
So I don't really have a name for this one, but it's a really fun fingering effect that I like to do. It looks I think it's visual.
I love the name. That should be the first one.
Oh my,
That's fun.
Thanks.
no, that was awesome. I don't think so, Nishan, you can figure
I was
it
looking
out.
for a generic name so that I
We
could
should
Google
talk.
and figure out how to do
Brains,
it. But this
Yeah, that's
is
why I didn't tell you. That's why I didn't tell you the real name.
ask ChatGPT. Ask
I've
ChatGPT.
I've
Might have
done
an
my
answer for
I've
you.
done my preparation, Nishant, and I know that when I share the name of a magic trick, that there's this amazing resource called YouTube that people can.
uh,
Thank you.
Oh, that was awesome, Jared. I think we should talk about the final part of this video. So how should people get in touch with you if they want to learn about your journey, and also tell us
Yeah,
a
you
little
got
bit
it.
about the book
So
that you mentioned
I've
initially.
spent the past couple of years writing this book, and it really started with this question that I would get over and over, which was, how does a magician become a product manager? And I think that there's just so much fun in the different stories to tell that led me along this journey. Whether it's the first show that I ever did, which is how the book, starts, and where I get heckled to death by a 7-year-old kid, named Sonia, and the learnings that I was able to get from that, and how I applied those learnings, and so forth. And so it was a lot of fun to write. The book follows my journey from magic through MBA school, and then all to product management at Amazon. The way that I think about it is that I think it can be helpful for non-traditional MBAs who are looking to understand, one, what does it take to even get into a top 25 MBA school as a non-traditional MBA. My story to do that into itself, I think, adds a lot of value to those prospective students. Then, secondly, how do you manage your MBA journey to get the job of your dreams? And I came into MBA school, in 100 directions. I really didn't know where I wanted to go. Initially, when I went into MBA school, I wanted to get into venture capital and help entrepreneurs because I was working as an entrepreneur more or less, and I really liked that idea. Found that once I got to MBA school, that there were two ways of doing that. One was either go into investment banking. The other was to become an entrepreneur myself or work in a startup. The investment banking route didn't sound very interesting to me. And then the startup route sounded interesting, but I had just spent most of my early career in businesses that nobody heard about. And I had an opportunity here to build my chops potentially at a big brand that could set me up for the future. And so I thought, you know what, I kind of need to use this opportunity to get a name brand place on my resume. And then I can always go back and do this startup stuff later. And so that was my approach. The first year in MBA school, I threw spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was, fortunate enough to get an internship with Dell, where I was a product line manager at Dell. And being the product line manager helped me understand what product management and hardware technology looks like. By the time I finished that internship, I knew I wanted to be in tech. And I didn't quite know it was product management yet, but I was getting closer to product management. Had some
Sure.
great calls with folks at Amazon ahead of those interviews, and found, I asked questions like, hey, what's product management like at Amazon? This is what it looked like at Dell. How is it different? And I actually understood it a little bit more. And I think that helped quite a bit. The other piece of it that I found to be really amazing, at least as far as my journey is concerned, is the conversations with Amazon, the interviews with Amazon, as rigorous as they were very conversational and casual. And I remember, I'm from, the Northeast, and I was a magician, and I go to MBA school at UNC, which is in the Southeast. And there's a culture in the Southeast that was new to me, which is a little bit different. And it's a little bit, Southern boys is kind of like a good way to think about it. And Nishant, I'm sure you can kind of, think about what that was like for you as well, kind of
Yeah.
UNC. And my first year there, I was really trying to fit in, and business casual and like wearing khakis. I never wear khakis. Like I hate khakis; they're uncomfortable. And I'd have to wear khakis and nice shoes and suits and all of these things. And I sit down to the interview with Amazon, and I saw the person across from me was wearing a T-shirt, and I was wearing a jacket. And I just took the jacket off, put it on the back of the chair, rolled my sleeves up, and was like, "Okay, let's talk." And connected at a very human level. It felt very natural. I decided I was just going to be myself, and they could either hire me because I was myself, and if they didn't, that was fine with me. And that was a really important moment for me in my career and my transition through MBA school to say, you know what, I have to stick with who I am and not try to be somebody I'm not. And then we get into Amazon and how I learned the ropes at Amazon, how I learned how to become a good writer, which is really important for product managers at Amazon. How I learned how to navigate senior leadership through really difficult launches and questions, and then ultimately, contributed to some of the launch of some of Amazon's most magical products ever, which was really cool. So Amazon Halo was a wearable device that we launched in 2020. I was the lead product manager for our mobile app, which was the only way to get all of the data associated with the Halo device. And we launched some really wild features, including this one called Body. where you would take a picture of yourself and we would tell you your body fat percentage based on the picture using AI and computer vision. Another one was called Tone. We had a microphone in the band that would record snippets of your conversation throughout the day and tell you how you were perceived to others based on the positivity and energy in your voice. Like, this is stuff from Star Trek, right? Like, this isn't
Yeah.
real, and but it is real, and we did it, and we launched it, and we built it. And as part of that launch, I learned a lot along the way and grew. As I mentioned, was able to get promoted to a principal product manager technical. And so in the book, I unpack kind of all of those learnings, how I grew, how I learned, how I was able to achieve some of those goals. And then ultimately, translate everything that I did there to a great career at Chewy, where I was the director of product management, and now eventually into this role at Udacity, where I'm the vice president of the consumer business and leading launches every week with a really great team. So it's been a lot of fun. The book is available on Amazon. It's called For My Next Trick: A Magician Transforms into a Tech Exec. It's available in paperback and then also ebook. It's also on Kindle Unlimited if you want to read it there. And then if folks want to get in touch with me, my Instagram handle is at jmolt, and my Twitter handle is at jmolt, and my LinkedIn is Jared Molton. And as far as I know, I'm the only Jared Molton out there.
And that's the end of the show, is it? Like, I mean, it was like crescendo and everything is done. Like, that was fascinating. Thanks so much for sharing all of that, Jared.
That is super fascinating listening to all the products and things that people are doing now, and you're already thinking ahead. Like, super
Yeah,
fascinating. I'm
looking forward to
definitely
it.
going to read the
We
book.
need a signed copy,
This is going
though.
to be on my
You
list.
got it. Happy to.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Can I get one too?
Shruti, Nishant, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun, so I
Cool.
really appreciate it.
No,
No, same here. Thank you so much for giving us time, Jad. This is definitely going to help people understand what it looks like to come from a non-traditional background, which we have, like talked before. But this is definitely truly special. And look at your magic tricks and also learn about your book, like how to grow into the career, not just break into product management, but become an exec. This is
Awesome.
truly
So glad to hear it.
beneficial for
Thanks
our
again.
audience.
You did it. The shot. It looks like you're practicing a new skill here.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great Sunday. Take care. Bye.